with less than 3% chance, and 8 years to reattain the trust allotment of her my great-grandfather. That being said, I'm a Southern Ohlone, and I default to my elders, and I want to introduce Greg Castro, who is a local indigenous culture bearer and indigenous representative of the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone People, First Nations people of this territory.
So this is the talky part of the program today, so I'm kind of surprised that it's not just me and Canyon. But thank you very much for attending, and we'll see where this takes us. We've had these discussions before at very much more formal settings. This is very informal, and this is sort of our preference anyway. My name is Greg Castro. I'm from Thrall-Slinen and Rumsen and Ramaytush Ohlone. The Thrall people of my father, who I've been working with for almost 30 years, are south of the Ohlone, from Monterey County down to San Luis Obispo County, along the coast. That would be from south of Big Sur down to Morro Bay, including Hearst Castle, which we fortunately have nothing to do with and don't get any revenue from. Just thought I'd throw that in there. And the Rumsen people of my mother, we come from a village called Tukutnu along the Carmel River above Monterey Bay, and we've lived there our entire lives, my mother's lives, her father's life, going all the way back to the beginning times. And the same with my father. He grew up in his homeland. But I came to San Jose and have grown up and still live in San Jose, work in Silicon Valley, but have tried to maintain my connection to all the various threads of my people. In the last few years, I've been working with the Association of Ramaytush People, Jonathan Cordero, who's their tribal chair, and trying to represent Ramaytush issues here. So since we don't have a plan, I'll just start there. The sad truth is that there are no known lineages that survived the colonization of San Francisco. None. They were completely wiped out in the mission and post-mission time. What we do know is that one woman survived from a village just south of San Francisco in Pacifica. And she had children that formed 4 lineages that have become the remnants of the Ramaytush people in the San Francisco Peninsula. And those are the only people that survived that era from anywhere near here. There are other Ohlone, there's the Chochenyo people, multiple groups and organizations on East Bay, and then extending south all the way to mid-Monterey County. There's multiple groups throughout that area. And many of them have participated in San Francisco activities for many years. And we thank them for visiting our homeland and taking care of it. And now we're part of a process to educate the public on what really happened here. And so in multiple ways we do events like this, big or small. This is our 3rd one this week, I think. And at larger events like at the California Union Conference, which will be next month, shameless plug. That's at Sonoma State, hopefully. Hopefully the fire won't get in the way. And so wanted to acknowledge the ancestors of the people that were here, my northern relatives, and I like to think that they would be proud of what we're trying to do here, is retain the memory of their caretaking of this place we now call San Francisco, what they called Yalamo, for many thousands of years. So, we're going to do something? Okay, your choice. Huh? I
come from a matrilineal society where my mother and grandmother have taught me that when song, ceremony, and dancing stops, so does the earth. I too believe that. So I want to make offering to this circle to offer a grandmother song to honor our grandmothers, their grandmothers, and in all Mother Earth, for without them and without her, we would not be here. We share this time and space together for a reason. This song came to me differently than it was taught. I have Mutsun and Chumash ancestry, and I learned a traditional grandmother song from a Chumash mentor. And when I sang the song, I could only sing it as a support singer. When I tried to sing it independently, a different song came. And this song came to me differently, and therefore it's shared differently. And it's in a community space, and it's shared with all of the community that I share circles with. Hence the reason why it's okay to be recorded and shared. And if I have relatives who would want to attempt to try and sing it, they are welcome to. And the energy is just to honor our grandmothers. So it's with that humility, that gratitude, that present-mindedness that I offer this song here in this space. And if all y'all can hear me, can I hear you say, oh? Oh! All right. At the end of the song, we're going to do that again. So Canyon's grandmother song. Moi moi o kawana, moi moi o ka, moi moi no, moi moi o ko, moi moi o na yo konale, moi moi yo konale, moi moi o kawana, moi moi o ko, moi moi no, moi moi o ko, moi moi o na yo konale, moi moi yo konale, moi moi o kawana, moi moi o ko, moi moi no, moi moi o ko, moi moi o na yo konale, moi moi yo konale. No son and So, we are here in Yalamu. Can I hear you say Yalamu?
Yalamu.
Can I hear you say Ramatush?
Ramatush.
And can I hear you say Aloni?
Aloni.
You're acknowledging a few first words and first languages. Right here is the original place that is known as Yalamu. Before San Francisco was San Francisco, before it was California, this place was known and is known as Yalamu. The first language of this land is Ramatush. And in what we know that is commonly called as Ohlone territory, which spans from San Francisco to Oakland down to Monterey Bay, there are 8 languages in this territory. So, right here in the San Francisco Bay, the first language is Ramatush. And that is that word that we recognized, Ohlone. It's kind of like saying Bay Area. It's not quite giving you an exact location. I myself am a proud Ohlone individual. However, I recognize that there are community members who have ancestors to the Bay, to this area, who've always been here, who've always been part of the first stewards of the land before contact, who do not identify with that term Ohlone. It is a common term that we just bring together because we are in what some linguists call the Costanoan or the Ohlone linguistic grouping, and it's just pretty much this Bay Area, Silicon Valley region. So, part of that is, what are we talking about? We're talking about land acknowledgements, acknowledging the land, recognizing that wherever we go, we are on occupied native land. We are on stolen land of indigenous peoples, the first peoples who've always been part of these territories, the original stewards of the land. So one step that we take is acknowledging the land, because we all can recognize that. We don't need to lean to academics or people in charge or governments to tell us what we should know. We can start our education, take those steps going forward to recognize, where are we? Who has always been taking care of these lands before these buildings were here? before this city was here, before these adobe buildings were here. Think about that for a moment. I'm here with Greg, and I ambushed him into coming to this space. He is a local indigenous community representative, and he's just amazing. Awesome mentor. And we learned from many community members. Hey, my phone fell. Okay. Sorry. And so I'm honored to be part of this re-indigenized conversation. And I'm honored to share space and share the stories of our community members. Bernadette Smith has been revitalizing the Acorn Festival that hasn't been shared on her land for in excess of 100 years, possibly two. I think two. She can speak her story better than me. But in this, it's how do we ground ourselves? She acknowledged we're in Ohlone territory. She's a California native, and she's visiting San Francisco, aka Yalamu, and she allowed the community who's witnessing her work to become familiar that she is humbling herself as a California indigenous woman, recognizing the land that she's on. And that's very common. And sometimes mainstream society doesn't remind us these indigenous protocols, these cultural etiquettes, these ways of respecting other cultures and culture sharing opportunities. And so I figure we can go back and forth, and then we could probably open it up for a Q&A. But what are your thoughts of land acknowledgements?
Want justice.
Learned, and I learned from elders who have been working for decades to maintain our visibility in the Bay Area, the land that we've been on since the world began, the way it looks now. And archaeologically, that's well over 10,000 years, and in parts of California, approaching 20,000 years at least. And of course, some of our elders say, well, the archaeologists are finally catching up, and they're getting closer every day, but they're still not there. What has happened, though, is that the last 250 years has overshadowed the tens of thousands of years before that. And in next week, I believe November 2nd, most of the community is going to acknowledge, some call it celebrate, Portola's discovery of the bay. And what he actually discovered 250 years ago was a bunch of Ohlone living around the bay already, literally by the thousands. So what he discovered is sort of why we're here to talk about. He discovered it was full of people already. And that's the part that I think the public needs to know about, that there is a long, rich history here in Yalamu, here in the Bay Area, here in California, that stretches back thousands and thousands of years, and all those people are still here. They maybe have been hidden for a while. The other part of California public education that bypasses parts of history is that the government itself, at the state level, authorized the hunting and killing of Indians not that long ago, in the 19th century, a little over 150 years ago, by the thousands. It is very well documented by themselves, because the bean counters, the people handing out the money that paid for those scalps of Indians that were brought in, recorded every cent in their little ledgers and put them in the National Archives. And a friend of mine, Ben Madley, among others, he was not the first, but he probably did the most extensive documentation of that process by going into the archives and writing a book just a few years ago called American Genocide, the California Catastrophe. He's a professor at UCLA of history. And you can, if you're really interested in that part of the details, I don't need to read the book, and I can't read the book. It's just too difficult for me, because I kind of lived that history. A lot of us did live that history. So we know the numbers. But I can tell you one that burns in our brain that we can't let go of. And it's pretty consistent across the state that 90% of our ancestors died from Portola's discovery of Indians to about the 1880 census, about more than 90%. And depending on the numbers that you accept, especially for the indigenous population from before Europeans, the percentage actually is probably higher. Maybe 95% of our ancestors died. So the people you see now, the California communities, recognized, unrecognized, urban, rural, wherever they are at, are the tough and enduring survivors of perhaps 5% of the ancestors. That is a truth that we don't say to elicit sympathy or any reaction at all, just to give us a background to everything that you see around you today and the history that we live every day. And that's especially true here in Yalamo, where, as I said earlier, there are none at all survivors of San Francisco proper. There were some of the ancestors that came from Pacifica, relations of the Yalamo people, the Pacifica that intermarried and birthed children here in at Mission Dolores. So they were somewhat Yalamu-ish because they had the blood, but they weren't actually born in the homeland. So there's that kind of stark reality of the land that you now live on. And again, it's not to make anybody feel bad. We feel bad enough for it, for all of you. But if we're going to heal this place, if we're going to heal each other, if we're going to heal ourselves, sometimes you have to look at the wound, and after a lot of medicine is applied and it's still not working, sometimes you have to lance the wound. Sometimes you just have to lance that pus sac and let it bleed out. And we may be near at that point, if not already there. So one of the things I do is work with a coalition out of Sacramento State University, CSU Sacramento, called the California Indian History Curriculum Coalition, to address the inaccuracies and the whitewashing of history. And one of the things that happened just a few years ago is the State Department of Education finally recommended to schools not to teach the Mission Project. So if you've been in the California system long enough, probably most of you, if not all of you, built a mission out of sugar cubes, popsicle sticks, or a Michael's kit. So which most people in my little informal survey didn't remember anything about why they built it, other than the teacher told them they had to, and they tried to get a good grade. And then their dad had to run down to Michael's the day before the assignment was due to build a last-minute mission. That seems to be the majority of the memories of the mission system, but nothing about the people or the history. And what little history was taught was completely suppressed as to the reality. The Indians were here, the Indians were in the mission, the Indians went away. In some cases, that's literally what all they remembered. And on several levels, that's not true, especially the Indians went away. The Indians did not go away. Because after the missions were secularized, made public, there was a brief period of the Mexican rule where they were too busy in Mexico to taking care of their own affairs after independence from Spain. So California was sort of left on its own, and things started getting kind of crazy here in California. And then in that time period, Americans started showing up, and eventually they took over and wound up taking over the area, and it became a state in about 1850. And after that, it got much, much worse for natives, because there was public pronouncements by politicians, laws enacted that bluntly talked about the eradication and extermination of Indians. And this was not a few crazy wackos out in the boondocks. This is not just a few people. These were the politicians going all the way up to the governor himself, who declared a war of extermination against Native people in California. And they authorized militias initially to go out and hunt the Native people. And they were paid for the scalps that they brought back.
$20
people.
each one.
And that went on for almost a quarter of a century. To where, as I said earlier, almost all the people were eradicated. And those that were left had to literally hide to save themselves. And even after the laws were taken off the books, as we know now with our African American brothers, once they were emancipated, they were free technically, but it was not necessarily a fun time, and it still isn't after all this time. And it was the same for the Native people. After the laws were taken off the books, it still wasn't safe to be Native. So lots of people hid for a very long time. There were communities that did survive as Native communities, but they were extremely impoverished. So it was a very hard time for our ancestors for a long time. But as Anne-Marie, Kenyon's mom says, it's never been a better time to be an Indian. And that's probably true simply because a lot of our own people have awakened and have thrown off their fear, have brought back their culture, their language. And what's really good is that our young people, and Canyon is probably one of the older ones now of that generation, but the young people have strongly stood up and said, I'm not going to be afraid anymore, I'm not going to hide anymore. This is who we are, this is our place, we belong here, and we need to take care of it. And they're coming, in my opinion, just in time, because we desperately need that strength and wisdom to be brought forward in these times when Mother Earth is not liking what we're doing. And our ancestors tell us that we need Mother Earth, but Mother Earth doesn't need us. And scientists will tell you that in ancient Earth, at least 5 times the Earth has thrown off everybody and kind of started from scratch. So that's something that people need to understand, both from the cultural viewpoint that we need the Earth, it doesn't need us, and that the Earth has cleansed itself a number of times before because of misbehavior. That's not something out of a religious book. That is something that is in the archaeological paleontological record that says all life is extinguished, just about, and then Mother Nature started over again. So that's also part of why we're doing this, and we'll kind of drill down more to land recognition and acknowledgement in a minute. But I thought that's something that, talks about there's a moral dimension, an ethical dimension to recognizing this place and the people who used to be here, but there's a real urgent reason why we need to get right with each other and ourselves and the Earth, because we're under dire threat.
Can I hear a good O for Greg? And a good O to our community members who helped make this sign last minute. Oh! Deep appreciation. So, grounding yourself with that information, it's heavy, right? It's intense, and it's something that not many of us have had a chance to learn from, or learn about, let alone learn from. And so, there are many times that when we come to the table without this information, and we are in positions of power where our decisions will impact more than ourselves, it'll either impact our family, our community, or our environment. If we're coming to the table without even knowing this, many of the decisions going forward may not be considering these facts, these realities. Like when we recognize that Portola Trail is going to be acknowledged for its 250th birthday. Okay, Native peoples before then have been tending and stewarding the land with traditional and communal ecological practices, maintaining and stewarding the land with fire and There were some permanent dwellings, but a lot of temporary dwellings. So, you know how we're suffering from a lot of catastrophic fires?
Right.
Indigenous communities respected fire, have a relationship with fire, and tended the land with fire. Same thing when it comes to this pavement right here. Did you know that the soil beneath this pavement will not fill the rain, will not grow grass or any plants? It doesn't get nourished. So, with indigenous cultures and communities who temporarily stay in various areas to go to harvest and travel and stay in their territories tending and stewarding, these areas were recognized as beautiful gardens. Even the Spaniard records and some of the Mexican records, and even like Steinbeck wrote, the sky was darkened with birds. This area, John Muir acknowledged this is a beautiful garden, like a Garden of Eden. However, the practices of settler colonialists say put a fence around it and let's preserve it. Or those natives don't know what they're doing because they don't live in civilization like we do. So, native peoples were forcefully stopped from tending and stewarding this well-tended garden. And just like if you stop tending your garden for 10 years, 20 years, that area wouldn't be beautiful or pristine or maintained. So, 250 years, native peoples in California have not had a chance to steward these territories. That is part of the reason why we are suffering today. And the same thing with our preoccupation with instant gratification, entitlement to resource extraction. Our mentor, he's my mentor, and Dr. Daryl Babe Wilson has stated, and I will repeat it, and I hear Greg repeat it, that America is spiritually, morally, and ethically bankrupt.
Right.
My mother said, America is built and founded on lives and deaths of indigenous peoples. I too believe that. I am not a proud American. I do not like to identify with that term.
Right.
And so I don't want to create distance between community members who are proud to be American. I don't want to create distance between community members from many nations around the world. I honestly believe that when and if we have a chance to focus on honoring our ancestors, when we honor our ancestors, we can recognize that all of our ancestors have indigenous lineages to the land that they come from. And when we honor our ancestors and when we honor truth and history, we can come together in community. There is a common thing happening here in the Bay Area, actually all around the world, but I'm going to recognize, especially in the late 60s and 70s. Did you know that the Native American did not have the right to practice religion freely until 1978? There are community members in this circle who were born before Native Americans had the right to practice religion freely. That being said, there were other occurrences happening. Resurgence of community and culture. Black Panthers were strong. And even pagan communities were reconnecting to their earth-based spiritual practices. However, along the lines of how pan-Indianism, many natives coming together to stand strong, like with the occupation of Alcatraz, which is turning 50 this year, November 20th, 1969. Occupation of Alcatraz, good O, because that brought, and it was a catalyst to bring indigenous peoples, well, just to a lot of movements and a lot of amazing, change policy. Nixon shifted Nixon's policy. But bringing that resurgence of culture and revitalization. And so in that, there was also this like energy of new age connection. And so we have core shamanism, and we have foundations that are profiting off of spirituality, which are not so healthy because they are not accountable. When we recognize that if we honor our indigenous teachings from wherever we come from, and when we honor indigenous protocol by becoming familiar with the indigenous stewards and peoples and histories of the land that we're on, we could respect the community guidelines, we could respect the communities present, and come humbly and respectfully versus appropriating culture. And I honestly believe that when non-indigenous peoples gravitate to indigenous ceremonies and spirituality, it's not that they weren't a native in a previous life. It's entirely possible, but I don't know about that. I honestly believe it's their own ancestors, their own lineages calling them home to their own earth science-based spiritual practices. We just have to dive deep enough. We are all impacted by colonization. I also recognize that we benefit from colonization because, well, I wouldn't be who I am here today right now. I wouldn't have these things that I benefit from right here, right now. However, I recognize that colonization has impacted us. It was a wonderful catalytic event that boomed technology and boomed opportunities and boomed our populace. Now we need to slow it down. We no longer have to focus on this colonial mentality of resource extraction and entitlement and instant gratification and consumption, materialism, disposable societies. We don't need it. We've grown accustomed to it. My grandparents did not have plastic bags in grocery stores. We did not have gendered products a few generations. So we really need to recognize that these patterns, these themes, these things we've grown accustomed to are not very old. They're not, they are very new, but they aren't a way that we can live respectfully and humbly and accountably in relation to the environment and all living systems. I go to classrooms and I talk to third graders. A lot of California natives do go to classrooms and we talk about being living natives. And I focus on the messaging about being alive and how I live. Yes, I drive a car. Many kids see history books that talk about us in the past tense. Ohlone people were here. They used to do that. They used to do this. Well, if you were here a few hours ago, Bernadette is still grinding acorns, sharing indigenous food with her community. So it's not a was or a were or a used to. It's a now. We are. We still are and continue to be. This is Ohlone territory and Ohlone people are here. And we can acknowledge that. And so, like even talking about restoring reciprocal relationships, recognizing all living systems are sacred. I get kind of frustrated when I'm entering some New Age circles that have that vegan agenda because they don't want to, they recognize the impact of how animal proteins are hurting the world, which it's true. I love accountable, sustainable resources. I respect all living beings, and I recognize and I let the kids know, I'm like, how many of you are omnivores? Handful, raise their hand. How many of you are vegetarian or vegan? A handful, raise their hands. And I'm like, so did you know that you still have to impact a life or even take a life to sustain your own? You can impact the life of kale, taking its leaves, take off the whole head of the broccoli. You're still taking a life to sustain your own. And when we humble ourselves and recognize that we are impacting a life and recognizing where that life has always been a part of this cycle and see how it gets to us. Like, there's no pineapples here. I love pineapples. But I recognize that what does it take to get that pineapple to my plate? What does it take to get these things here that I benefit from? How can I humble myself in recognizing my impact in that whole entire system? These are things that are not commonly taught in mainstream society that we need to bring back into the education system. And that's right along line with land acknowledgements. Why acknowledge the land? That's over and done with. We're in San Francisco. It's modern day society. But think about how we can honor the past to shape the future. It ties into everything. I honestly believe that when we think about how indigenous teachings, indigenous pedagogies can be brought into modern day thought process, our common problems, we can solve and strategize and go forward towards a sustainable future by recognizing that. And so, if you want to add more on and then more to this, and then we could add Q&A.
Oh.
It's hard to have land acknowledgement when we're so far above actual land.
Right? We're not even grounded.
On this pavement. So it is metaphorical. And I think one of the things we're doing is working on a project with the Exploratorium that is going to look at in different ways what San Francisco looks like over time. And what we've been sharing with them, which they wanted to hear, because the original project was only going to go back a little ways. They're doing some construction projects over by the Exploratorium by Pier 15, and as they go down to build parking garages, they're finding layers of San Francisco history. And at the very bottom, of course, they're finding other things that predate San Francisco that are part of Yalamo. And we want to make sure that it's proportionate, that most of the history of this place is not European. Even if they don't have that information. But I think it's important to acknowledge its existence in various forms and ways. And to put into perspective the history that followed after. Why, for instance, at some point there is no evidence of Yalamo, of the original people. That's also very important. Also, the landscape itself has changed radically. They already have some displays which we hope to expand and extend how that looks, the landscape just in the 250 years since Portola showed up. Even just going back 150 years into historical California times, the land looked very much different. So much of it is now landfill. And of course, that kind of information is really important if you're talking about the previous earthquakes and the next one, where landfill may become an important issue. In the 89 earthquake, I was actually in a building in downtown San Jose, a mere 15 miles, and I could look out the window and see Loma Prieta from where I worked. And our building shook a great deal and had some damage, but remained standing. 40 miles further north, we have a number of buildings in San Francisco and in Oakland that basically fell apart. We had the Cypress Freeway that fell apart. So why is that? They were further away. How come they sustained more damage? It's because people didn't realize the landscape had radically changed and been re-engineered, and not re-engineered with enough knowledge to sustain what Mother Earth can do. It's improved, but believe me, a lot of scientists believe we haven't done enough, and we still don't know the extent of what a big earthquake, which is, they keep saying is coming, is probably going to come, what it really will do to our civilization here in the West Coast. And now we're dealing with climate change. So here in San Francisco, you're going to be dealing with sea level rise. I know a number of climate scientists, and both of them laugh at the government projections that it is vastly worse than that, and it's virtually a certainty. The numbers don't lie. But people who take those numbers and publish them sometimes do. And that's what we're dealing with now, that the world is radically going to change. It's going to change much sooner than you thought. It's going to change much worse than you thought. And most of that's going to be on the backs of people of color, people who are economically depressed, people who can't deal with it, and those who can think they can isolate themselves away from it. And that's probably the part they haven't figured out yet. For the numbers we're looking at, there's nobody who's going to not be impacted. So, can we do anything about it? Perhaps. It's still time. Should we do something about it? Well, absolutely. And that's what our elders tell us. Elders who taught me said you can't play the numbers game. You can't think about pluses and minuses. You simply look at your culture, you look at your spiritual beliefs and values, and you do what the right thing is, which is what your ancestors taught you to do, what your ancestors gifted you to do, what your ancestors committed you to do, because they did the same thing. And they created a world that was a gift to us, and we should be grateful and thankful for it, and treat it with the respect that gifts deserve. And this is a gift that keeps on giving, because the intent of our ancestors was they passed on what was given to them, to us, and we are supposed to take care of what's being gifted to us and pass it on to the next generations. And of course, we've messed that up. So whether or not it is fixable is not relevant in the cultural and spiritual views of our elders. It's what we're supposed to do. Simple as that. So we did have an opportunity for questions. if anybody has anything burning. Otherwise, we can continue to yak for a while because we have things to say. But if you have any questions at all,
How do you feel about America being destroyed?
what I told some people that Kenya and I have done something called Ask an Indian. She calls it Ask a Native. And we've done this at a couple of conferences where, because people don't know that they've actually met an Indian most of the time, because we don't usually wear our labels on our foreheads on normal days, just on special days. And so they don't know, and so often when I attend panels, I'll get people in the hallway that come up to me and go, I've just been dying to ask this question, but I had nobody to ask, now you're here. So we actually created a panel discussion that said you can ask any question.
How do you feel about America being destroyed?
Pardon me?
How do you feel about America being destroyed?
It's
You said
organic
I
process.
asking. You don't have to answer that question. You don't want to.
Well, the answer, I actually already answered it. By our elder taught me it's morally, spiritually background. So, and I believe that. That he said that's what America was to his ancestors.
I mean, but how do you feel about it, though? How do you personally feel about it?
To me, America is a political structure.
So how do you feel about America? How do you feel about it being destroyed? Like I said, you don't have to answer that question if you don't want to.
I get your point. It deserves it.
Right.
That's my answer. It deserves it. It's not whether I like it or not, or wish for it or not. It's getting what it deserves. Because they haven't done things right. And a lot of people have allowed it to happen. We're all part of it. We're all part of that system, whether we like it or not. And a lot of people have allowed it to happen because they took too much energy to do anything about it. Or they felt unempowered to do it. And that's the lie.
It's not your fault.
It's not your fault.
No, it's not their fault.
That's not
But
your fault.
it's not anyone's fault, other than when they had a opportunity to do something they did. And so we talk about, so we maybe look at, well, what can one person do? And that's the numbers game that the systems want you to play. That one person won't do anything. But if everybody thinks, well, I need to do something because it's morally, spiritually the right thing to do, then you'll see you have power. Then you'll see you have an effect. And at least you can sleep better at night. That, to me, is more than enough reason to do it. Yeah.
I got a question. First, I just want to say thank you for coming out and giving your time, because that's the most precious thing we give is our time, right? And that and as usual, give all praise and honor to the Great Spirit. It's always around us and all and you made a good point. I had a question where you said you don't want to be identified as American. And personally, for me and the brother, we hate that. We hate to be called American. We hate to be associated with anything that has to do with America, the culture, the way it lives, the way its mentality. So, and I understand you don't want to make strife and stuff, but sometimes we have to stand up. We're done with excuses. We're done with making excuses for why we have to exist, why we have to walk up here, why this kingdom's fucked. We're done with that. Hey man, if anything, your turn to listen. You've been talking to us. We've been shutting up. We've been listening to you guys. Obviously, you see what they've done to the place. So how about you guys listen now? And obviously America will be destroyed because it deserves it. That's karma, and that's the Great Spirit showing its power.
Plus, it was written.
As it was written. As it was written.
Well, and I kind of said that earlier, that the system oppressed, tried to eradicate and almost succeeded our ancestors, then suppressed us, and then oppressed us, and are still doing that. And what's beautiful I see is that our young people are fighting back. Again, if you look at the history, we were basically beaten into submission, morally, if not physically, to where we were in fear of our lives, and there was good reason for it. And our African American brothers know what I'm talking about because they still are in fear of their lives, right? And Native Americans in various parts of the country are experiencing the same thing. If you go to the upper Midwest, my sister-in-law is in Rosebud Reservation, and they experience that still in the towns surrounding the reservation, that it's dangerous to be Native. there's a lot, if you've heard about it lately, it's something that has actually been known in the Native community for a long time. Our women are disappearing and being murdered, or just disappear. They go away. There's a saying in on the res that if a woman disappears, they say, well, we can't look anymore, but we'll try again in spring. You know what that reference is? In their area, heavy snowfall during the winter, so they have to wait till the snowfall thaws before they can find her, probably, because she's probably out there dead. That's the reality today. So we understand that part, and you're entirely right about that last part. That our young people, it's been a progression, and our young people are the answer to many generations of prayers, because they're the ones who finally got to a point of knowledge and skills and anger to stand up and say what you said. I'm not going to take it anymore. And I don't care what you think. This is truth. This is truth. America is morally, spiritually bankrupt. And we're going to say it.
And to add on to that, we're created. Our behaviors are created. We have to think about, our industrial models, our general approaches. How do we maximize? How do we overcome? How do we take on these challenges? So think about our industrial education system, this pipeline system. We create, let's go back to like boom, the baby boom. Gerber was only providing like 55,000 baby cups a year, and they boomed to over 2 million. And so when we think about industrial approaches, general blanket approaches, this industrial model is to speed up, to not care about its impact, to not recognize these patterns. It doesn't think 10 or 20 years in the future, it thinks tomorrow. Capitalism, consumerism. It focuses on the instant gratification. It doesn't think, if we do something and throw it in the river, oh no, what happens down the river? They don't care, because they're taking care of what they want to take care of. And so think about our education system. Our education system does not prioritize interpersonal communication, reciprocal relationships, or accountability in behaviors to how we impact other living systems. We barely even can acknowledge how to apologize to each other without it feeling like a forced demonstration. And so when we don't have these teachings in our communities, and we don't have culture sharing in our communities, we have this behavior of my way or the only way, or speak English, why don't you? Versus, did you know California had in excess of 250 dialects? Over 90 language groups, of which our communities found ways to interact with each other, found ways to share culture, for songs to be shared up and down the coast, for communities to intermarry. This Eurocentric colonial model of, are you native? Like, you don't look native. Wait, who are you to say? Is there some higher power that says this is what a native looks like? What system was that in? Oh, that was a Eurocentric model. Oh, let's think about Western settler science. Very break apart, put together to see how these things operate, versus a holistic approach. We're not studying, placebo pills. And then the same thing, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, which political group do you think is most like pro environment,
I thought that was you, actually.
This coyote's going to turn into a hyena. People tell me that I should go into politics, and no, it's the system. It's how no matter how amazing an individual is, even if they were homegrown and we had all of the tools, maybe even we created a hybrid being where we could literally share messages. They, in that system, to attempt to care for the world and to care for how our decisions are being done with today's policies, would not survive. They, with amazing intent and good energy and connection to community, would still not survive in that system. So sadly, in today's political climate, I don't have a lot of faith. But tying into the education system and how we are into a entitled settler mentality of extraction and lack of respect in culture sharing and being accountable or reciprocal to how our impacts are, think about, kids are amazing. kids, once they're taught amazing things, or just get opportunities to share, they can do amazing things. So when we have ignorant community members teaching little ones, their behaviors will replicate that behavior. So think about empathic children who see something falling. Let's say my skirt flew and blew in the wind. There's children who are raised in a not so empathic or respectful community. They'll be like, well, that's not mine, and I don't care, and the wind's blowing, and it's not my deal. Then you have someone who has a little more compassion, would probably go get it. Oh, I want to help you. Simple things. My mom taught me that I need to offer a pinch of tobacco or a song to the plants when I pick it, because I'm benefiting from it. If I'm benefiting from a flower to give my own mother for Mother's Day, or benefiting from mugwort or sage or bay leaves for food or medicine, I'm letting that plant know where it's going, how I can respect it, and ethical and sustainable harvesting methods. Unlike today, when we have like new age community members who are like, oh, I love to smudge, like, oh my god, I could totally smudge away like this clear cutting, and I could totally smudge my crystals who are ill-gotten with children's slavery. I could just totally smudge it off because I'm entitled to it, because we're like all humans of this earth, right? But I don't even have to carry the heavy stuff about this botanical impact. I don't have to carry the heavy things about indigenous cultures not having rights or access to their land or their medicines. I don't care about all of that because I'm entitled to this, right? That's the behavior that we are teaching in today's education system. That's the behavior that we are teaching in today's media. You don't look native. Who taught you that? Who told you what does or doesn't look like a native? And this whole blood quantum thing, think about when we think about European ancestry and class systems. Think about dogs. Purebred, pure blood dog. Do you think they're really healthy? Like, their families have been line breeding, and most purebreds aren't really healthy genetically. However, and not many of them either. So, indigenous cultures have the majority, the indigenous cultures that I have encountered have always taught me that you marry outside of your clan. You marry outside of your own people, your own clan, your own little small family, to ensure that you don't hurt your family by having relations with your close relations. And when you have those bonds, you're strengthening your bloodline. Get that? Strengthening your bloodline, marrying someone outside of your community. Wait a second. So in today's modern society, purebred or blood, like, how much native are you? How much native? That's so offensive. How much native are you? Oh, you had someone who wasn't up there, so that means you're only 50%. Oh, you're only 25%. Oh, you're only that much. To me, if you are, like, this is the fine line that I have right now. I have to be careful with my words. I honestly do believe one drop you are, it's how you walk in the world. So you have to represent yourself and only yourself, and then how you account and respect your ancestors. So it's a fine line when someone says, I'm Native too. I really hate that Ancestry commercial. I learned that I'm 30% Native American. It opened my eyes. It's like, so what, your eyes are closed the whole time?
My mama, especially if you're from Oakland, them motherfuckers be coming out there talking about some. My grandmother came to West Oakland when the railroad.
Could be, though.
Hey,
I've done.
I'm really from East Oakland, though. Like,
Could be native.
Yeah.
so,
Well,
how
I
can
talked
get
to.
the bar? How can I ride to the bar to the San Francisco? That type of shit.
I've talked to
Y'all take care.
instructed government agencies that try to. Well, they just want to talk to us because they're required to, not because they really want to, but some of their internal processes and some executive directives have told government agencies they have to consult with Native people when their work impacts our culture. So they have to figure out how to do that, and most don't know how to do that. So I've done some work with government agencies, mostly with state parks, the last several